I am ending this year a lot more balanced than I have been in most of my life. This year taught me a lot about how to manage my relationships with people, how to manage my emotions, and really importantly, how to see codependent patterns and how to be healthier. Hello, welcome back to my podcast. My name is Arielle, and this is Feelin' My Feelings, where I finally feel my feelings after years of dissociating, being really unbalanced, caring way too much about someone else's feelings. Yeah. So, feeling my feelings is balancing for me. And man, in this episode, let me just say, I've tried to film this video on this topic like 4 times. And I definitely could release each evolution of awareness that I had in each of these videos, but I decided I do want to talk about it with the perspective I have now after having much more time with it. Y'all, we're all kind of codependent. We have all had really unhealthy relationship dynamics. And I think most of us start there, or at least we don't know how to perfectly learn balanced interactions with people until we get more experience. And I'm really happy to say that this past year, kind of forced me to even out. And so, yeah, in this video, I want to talk all about how I have been turning codependent habits and patterns and learning how to balance them instead, and learning how to have a healthier balance of learning and give and take in all sorts of relationships and social interactions. So, my empaths, my hypersensitive people, everyone with our imbalanced attachment styles. So, I obviously identify as really empathic and hypersensitive. And what that really means is I decided in my family dynamic growing up, my survival mechanism was to be hypervigilant and always on guard and trying to tune into what people are feeling in order to best protect myself. And yeah, at the moment, I call myself an empath, but in reality, we all do that. It's just I've taken that on a lot to the point where that has become just how I function in life. And I think for many years, I resented that, but I did not know how to get out of it. And maybe you can relate. I know everyone, again, is empathic in some way, and we deal with it in different ways. We have different attachment styles. Some people, in order to feel like they're liked, they end up people pleasing, they end up being really clingy, they end up throwing a lot of attention at someone in order to keep them. So that's, from what I understand, anxious attached. And for me, I do that sometimes, but I lean more towards anxious avoidant, which means I retract back, I decide to hermit and isolate myself, or sometimes if something seems like a lost cause for me, I'll completely cut it off and drop it. Also, I'm an Aquarius, so that really does fall in line with me. But either way, it's interesting being an empath who picks up on people's energies really easily and gets overwhelmed, but also decides to deal with that by retreating and being isolated and by herself all the time. So I could basically pretend, I somewhat was, I could call myself really independent, really self-sufficient. However, of course, I was still missing that part of how do I actually deal with people other than abruptly, just building up a wall, putting my guard up, or even cutting them off. How do I, also, I'm on the autism spectrum, so I guess that is another really common trait for someone like me. And let me just say, if you do identify with this, if you've had unhealthy or codependent patterns, or if you had to isolate yourself and you felt like that made you weak, I think we all have our ways of how, we did the best we could with what we had and what we knew how to do. And I will say, I have always felt proud of myself for not wanting to actually spend my days manipulating and lashing out at people, and instead, being in my own energy. So whatever you had to do to survive, is what you had to do. You are here, you're wanting to learn, and that is what's important. So, anyway, if you are really empathic, obviously, empaths, we spent most of our lives just listening to others more. And I recently learned another word. Like, I throw out so much like psychology terms, which I briefly, like, I kind of know, but like, complete honesty, I'm not a licensed therapist. I minored in psychology in college, but I am just kind of taking observations from what I've learned. So to be super real, but I will say I do believe I experience enmeshment with my family, and I kind of carry that over with a lot of people that I've had interactions with later. And so basically, that's, to me, it sounds like it's a form of codependency, but basically, I experienced doing what a lot of people do, specifically, obviously a lot of Asian people do. I tried to adjust myself to whatever would bring me my parents' approval. Not only that, but the enmeshment part it was like my energy and all the energy I was putting in was really over focused on my parents, to the point where I had to sort of tune into them all the time. So, I mean, again, this is more in my words than an actual therapist, psychologist words, so take it with a grain of salt, but I felt like my energy was always fused with theirs, and that there was attachment. There was always this dependency on them, which like I needed in order to determine honestly how I felt and how I could feel secure more so. And I mean, again, we do that with our parents all the time, but there's a point where you do lose yourself and you might have trouble actually focusing on yourself. So the way I experienced this, like, I have always been a person who had a core like sense of what she loved to do. I really liked music and writing and entertainment and films and film and TV. But as much as I like that internally, as much as like in my safe space, when I was isolated, when I was hermiting, I could like that. Externally, it did not feel safe to be really grounded in what I was passionate about. So again, Taylor's oldest time, I was the Asian kid who didn't feel comfortable fully being passionate about what she is because her parents. But what's sad is I realized that when I was carving out time to really focus on what I was really passionate about, it felt lonely. And I had just become aware of this feeling only the past couple years. And that's because I was finally breaking this. And it's weird because it's not that you're just looking for your parents' approval. It's that enmeshment, that sort of like that energy, that attachment. To me, it was like I did not even know how to feel without their influence. Again, I hate that. I hate saying that because I always thought I was really independent minded and I had my own voice and everything. But, you're human. And if you've had to be empathic to survive, that makes sense. And so that's why I think it's really important to point out that sometimes your energy, when you give it out to somebody, or like when your body's in a state of always being hypervigilant around them, it's hard to separate that. So also codependence. Anyway, so even though like I would be like, okay, I'm going to have, I'm going to prove that I'm still really good at math. I'm still really good at all my, like at everything in school. Like I can achieve and overachieve. And I did that when I was younger. I was always like, okay, I'll overachieve to please my parents. They'll give me approval. And then after that, I'm actually going to do what I love. After that, I'll carve out time and I'll actually do the things that I want to do. But let me just get out of the way the things I have to do in order to please my parents. That's not balanced. That is, and the more you do that, obviously, even when you're young, you probably burn out. And a lot of kids, when they're younger, a lot of teenagers, like I experienced depression when I was like 15-ish. And looking back, I realized that was probably burnout, like early burnout, which I recognize as an adult now, but that was early burnout and depression over not knowing how you can be yourself and not fulfilling yourself. As a teenager, it's different because you haven't fully formed your identity. But you still know at the core of you whether or not you're being your full self. And so if you're really codependent and enmeshed with your parents, it can be hard to, after all the achievements, all the stuff you're doing for them, to finally come back to yourself and to finally be in your own energy. For me, I think I had this pattern of isolating and hermiting and cutting things off abruptly because I also did not know any way to, in a healthy way, balance out with someone's overbearing energy. So I had to just completely close off in order to focus on my energy, to be on my energy at all. I know I'm saying energy a lot, like one of those spiritual people, but that's the best way that I could put it. And so that was the only way I could feel like I was not being pulled or enmeshed. Someone's gonna be like, you're not using enmeshment correctly, bitch. Stop pretending you're a therapist. But anyway, that was the only way that I felt like I wasn't overwhelmed by someone else's energies infiltrating my consciousness and what I actually wanted to feel. And so, yeah, it came down to I would finally get to writing like I've always wanted to do. I'd finally get to music and singing like I'd always wanted to do. But for many years, specifically from like high school until honestly my early 20s, like every time I carved out that time, I could not bring myself to be present with it. I couldn't emotionally be present with it. And here's the thing with me. I know how to follow a calendar and be disciplined and everything. At the moment, I'm not as disciplined as I used to be, but I had 30 minutes a day. I had an hour a day. I had 2 hours a day to just focus on myself and to focus on what I was actually passionate about. And I had therapists be like, well, maybe you just want to be in entertainment just for attention validation. And that was confusing. And even if that was a thing, like, doesn't mean that you can't like music. It was just, what is your motivation? Maybe you have to change it. But for me, eventually I realized that I did not know how to be present with my own needs and feelings and emotional needs. And so every time I would go to practice some sort of music or something, I felt weird just caring about myself. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like, I keep going back to this, it felt lonely. It felt like I needed some other energy there. And yeah, that was very codependent of me. And in the past couple of years, the only way that I actually was able to break out of that was, unfortunately, it came down to a lot of survival, a lot of aggressive, a lot of like, I had no choice but to, be in, like a couple years ago, I was in day jobs with really like invasive, manipulative people. And all I wanted to do was not be in this fake energy, not be in this toxic energy. And only then was I triggered enough to make myself listen to my own feelings. Only when I got to the point of being really manipulated, being in a toxic situation, did I feel the actual need to come home to myself. And what's sad is I don't know that I would have figured out how to get out of that, how to get out of my stuck pattern until something bigger triggered me. Now, I don't want to have it come down to that again. So, if you have experienced anything similar to that, or whatever it was, if you've developed some unhealthy attachment style to the point where you couldn't be present with yourself or aware of your actual needs and feelings and everything, then obviously that carries over to most of your social interactions. That's like friendships that don't always feel genuine, or like where there's a lot of gossip or cattiness. And then obviously that leads to romantic relationships with unhealthy dynamics. It's funny because I dated the most that I ever had in my 30s than I did when I was younger. And that was actually the start of COVID, and when everyone was like longing for people and like needing human connection. So obviously codependent me thrived when everyone else was dying for like a sensitive ear or like someone who could be a shoulder to cry on. So of course that's when I got into my real true dating era. And of course, it was really emotionally codependent and unhealthy. But let me take you through the journey of dating through my 30s and where I've arrived at now. And I feel like I've actually started to heal and I've forgiven myself for the past habits and people and things that I've done that were unhealthy in relationships. I mean, let me just say, if you feel shame over being that empathic person who overgave, who knew when someone was unavailable or emotionally unavailable, but you still went with it, there's no use in just sitting in shame about it. I think, again, it is hard to actually change your survival mechanism and your habits unless there is something bigger that triggers you. I mean, separate video when I finally get the aha moment about that, but like maybe at some point I can talk about how to rebalance without big triggers. But at the moment, what I can say is other people will be able to help you. But sometimes that does start out as unhealthy patterns. But do we really have to shame ourselves, or can we say and look back at things now and be like, okay, well, that helped balance me? Like, again, as someone who resorted to isolation and hermit mode, it was as if the only way to get me out of my stuckness and my stuck perspectives was if another person opened me up. And so when I was dating early 30s, like I got into one of those classic narcissist empath dynamics. And it was interesting because it had all the basic things. Like there was a lot of love bombing. There was gaslighting. Like he was always trying to make me jealous. I'm sure he cheated on me. I still believe he did. He was very selfish with me. He always wanted me to listen to his problems. I was like his therapist. And after a while, I realized he did not emotionally care as much, or could not emotionally care as much back. But I also gained satisfaction from being appreciated. I was appreciated as some sort of therapist figure or someone with like wisdom to help somebody. I did feel like an ego boost because either way, someone was obsessed with me. He was obsessed with me because I was the one person in his life that stuck by him, that also listened to all his problems. So obviously, he's going to be codependent on that. Plus, he was going to be selfish with it and to use me for it. And I let him. And so in a dynamic like this, unhealthy and also super codependent, like we had this joke, I remember, where we said when we were away from each other, we had what we called love stabs. So that was like physically, I actually felt the sinking feeling in my heart as if almost symbolically, like the attachment I had to him was ripping away. Almost like the invisible string of attachment, of codependent attachment we had together was ripping away because we were doing our own thing. Isn't that funny? Isn't it funny what energy feels like? Anyway, like we both had this feeling. Like he and I like had talked about it and we were like, yeah, I was really anxious. And like I felt it in my heart when I was away from you, when I was actually focusing on myself, when I was at the gym, when I'm at work, when I am not constantly anxiously thinking about you, when I'm not texting you, when you're not around me, I am this anxious. And I mean, maybe at that point I was anxious attached, obviously. But anyway, I remember both of us physically feeling it. And it was interesting because it was indicative of the fact that like we did not feel safe and secure away from each other, and we were very anxious, and we were really dependent on each other's energies to be reassuring, to tell us how to feel, to make us not feel lonely. And even just for a couple hours during the day, like it was as if I had this constant doubt. Like obviously that's insecurity, but it's like, first of all, it's insecure to always be like, oh my God, he's focusing on himself. Like maybe he doesn't like me now. Or like I had this odd feeling, oh, does he not like me anymore? Like if he is like just focusing on him. Of course, consciously, that's an insecure thought. But looking at that deeper, I know this is interesting to say, but I recognized our bond and the love, quote unquote, that we had, like it was actually attachment. And I was experiencing it as attachment. And even though on an insecure level, I was like, oh, he's away from me. Someone else is going to like him, blah, 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 blah. But what I was really experiencing was, oh, I don't feel the attachment. And if I don't feel the attachment, does he still like me if he's not attached to me even while he's working out? If he's not attached to me and constantly messaging me while he's at work? Like, a lot of what we think is love and what is making us insecure is actually like we're trying to still keep that enmeshment. We're still trying to keep that dependency on each other. And that's our proof that we're experiencing love. That's our proof that we're secure in a relationship. But it's actually the attachment. And so it's the funniest thing that we called it love stabs. Or again, it's like the invisible cord that of codependence we had, like it was pulling away from each other from our hearts. And like literally it felt like it was being ripped away. And so I don't know if anyone really relates to that. Like, let me know if you've had a similar experience, because that's what attachment and codependency feels like. And it's tricks you into thinking like, oh, I'm in love, or I'm just incredibly insecure, which is a piece of it. But it's like, you're just experiencing codependence. Oh, that kind of fell out as like a really unhealthy relationship. And I kind of classically was like, he's a narcissist, he used me, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually I realized, yeah. And then I was very much a victim to it. And then I allowed him to still use me. And then I knew better, but I also felt so much like I needed somebody, like I needed closeness, that I allowed myself to still enter into that. Because it was somewhat of a guarantee. It's somewhat of a guarantee when you're in a codependent relationship that someone really needs you. But eventually I stepped away from that. I knew that it was unhealthy. I still wasn't quite self-aware enough to realize my part in it. And I still ended up being in less toxic, but similar patterns. Like I feel like the past couple of years, I still dated people who needed me as their therapist, or needed me as sort of someone to console them or to give them comfort or whatever, while they felt lonely, while they felt down on themselves. But I mean, that's a reflection of also what I needed. And what's sad is, in this transition between really high codependent, toxic behavior and being more balanced and healthier, it's not going to be perfect. I wasn't going to starkly like just become balanced. And I also think that you always have a choice to how you can heal. And I know a big question everyone asks themselves is, should I stay single for a while and not be in any relationships and just work on myself? First of all, of course, it'll always benefit you to work on yourselves. And I will say, I think default, you should always be working on yourself. So that shouldn't be the question. The question is, at what point can I feel okay with bringing in somebody? At what point can I actually date somebody? At what point do I feel healed enough? Is there healed enough? And what if I'm not aware of that? Like, do I have to work on myself that much longer? And to be like, okay, how self-aware do I need to be in order to date? And for me, again, I go through on and off times of hermiting and isolating. So again, this past year, like the year before that, I was very much not really dating, not wanting to date. And I needed that year to be exactly how it was. And then this past year, I did date. And I needed this year to break me out of my shell. Like, I needed my hermit time. I needed my time where I was just in my own energy, where I wasn't attached to anybody. And then there was a point during that year, so like 2023, where towards the end of it, I was still really stagnant. I was stuck. I was not moving out of my old patterns. And so at that point, if you have worked on yourself, but not gone beyond your own thinking, not known how to grow out of just your own mindset, at that point, yeah, you might need another person, whether the universe kind of puts them in your life or whether you seek them out. Like, you might need another person there to get you out of your shell. And I think after years of dealing with things by isolating and hermiting, I feel like this past year was the year that finally just pushed me over the edge to the point where the universe was like, no more of this. Like, we have seen you isolate, and to be honest, we wanted you to be isolated for a reason. This is what I truly feel in myself. So separate from just being empathic or whatever, just for my own personal life, I felt like I needed to be someone who thought different and developed different patterns, and to break away from patterns that my family had and most people have. And I'm always going to be grateful that for a majority of my life, I turned to myself and I turned within in order to figure things out. I'm always going to be grateful that the way that I balanced out, the only way that I could fully become myself was unfortunately to be isolated, to be away from other people, and to be away from the noise of people who may mean well, but may have made me stray away from developing my own mindset, my voice, and my own values. So yeah, maybe in order to become my true self, I did have to be lonely for a period of time. But whether it was me consciously realizing that, or maybe the universe, or whatever happened, it felt like it was about time where I've worked on myself. I have done a lot of introspection. And about 2024, all right, bitch, it's time. Get into the world. Like, so that's basically what happened with me, is what I feel like. Like, I had reached the point of like, okay, like you gotta wake up. And so things happened this year where I found, like a lot of like invasive, like I could not escape people. I could not escape that I was being faced with like, oh, I feel like everyone's controlling me. And usually the way that I dealt with that was I will cut them off. I will move away. I will quit my job. I will leave this situation. But this year I had no choice but to face something, and to face it the most difficult way that I could, which is like like actually engage with it, even if other people did not listen to me, even if they did not get healthier, even if they didn't see my point of view, even if they were still toxic. I had to this year learn truly how to not lose myself when other people are being overbearing or being controlling or being unhealthy in any way. I learned this really hard lesson because I had no choice. I had no escape. So yeah, again, I don't want it to come down to that. But maybe in your life, as you balance out, there will be times where you have these years or months or whatever, these moments where you go far on one spectrum in order to balance yourself out. Like, I needed this year to basically balance out. So, and in dating, that looks like I pretty much, like, I feel like your relationships mirror a lot of what you need to work on in yourself. And so I had dated someone this past year that I really cared about and honestly saw a lot of myself in. And I know I could tell that he really cared about me. We both basically trauma bonded over similar family patterns, and I always appreciate that he was in my life. But it felt like he and I reflected this mindset of like, you can't trust people, or like, there's so many manipulative people in the world. I'm just very jaded about it. And having him in my life for that period of time where I felt over-controlled, where I was overwhelmed, was really, like, I'll always be thankful that I had someone to support me during that time. But at the same time, that does not necessarily help a person grow. That was sort of like the person you needed to get through it. And while we were dating, like, I could tell, we had unhealthy situationship patterns. Like, he would want to make me jealous. There was like need for validation. I also just was lonely and I needed somebody, and it kind of boosted my self-esteem to have him in my life. And so this past year was kind of like the last time I had that sort of unhealthy pattern. Hopefully, knock on wood, but or at least that is it really helped me see that pattern where like I And this is what most people do in dating. They try to find comfort and they try not to be lonely. However, a romantic relationship isn't a band-aid, but there is something to say about like having a companion, having someone to struggle with, and honestly having a trauma bond. And if you can accept that your situationship is what it is, that your trauma bond is a trauma bond, then maybe you can accept that there is importance in helping each other and in needing each other emotionally. But does everybody have to look like, oh, this is my romantic relationship, or this is the person I have to marry, or like, no. And it is really hard to navigate because it was very much, I've had a string of these types of relationships where I had an in-between. I had people who were there for me and I was there for them, but I didn't necessarily think, and it didn't necessarily turn into anything where it could be really committed or long-term. And sometimes you just need people and you just need to care about people. And I really care about, my fellow hurt people. But, if you are over focusing on them and not working on yourself, at that point, you obviously do need to work on yourself more. Anyway, so because I was still in this energy, and this year was the height of this, like this year held a mirror to this big limiting belief around people and my interactions and codependency that was blocking me from actually becoming who I wanted to be and blocking me from actually developing my purpose. So this year I had to wake up and I had to deal with the fact that you need to hold your boundaries, hold your frame, listen to your voice, even when other people are controlling you. And it does not help to just isolate yourself. I also ended up learning to get rid of this jaded feeling, because for much of my life, especially if you are isolated, if you are with yourself for a long time, there may come a point where you put up so much of a guard and a shield and you become untrusting and you start believing people are terrible. Like on and off, like most of the depression I've had in my life has come from this core limiting belief that like, oh, people are just going to use you for validation. People are just manipulative. Like there are not a lot of good people in the world. And this has been my biggest block in my life that I had to face this year. And a lot of what I had to do was basically put into perspective that people are hurt people. People are acting in survival. Like not everyone is doing anything obviously specifically at you. You can't take everything personally, but also like you can't fixate on someone enough to make them fix their own patterns. Like they have to choose that on themselves. The only thing you can really do is draw boundaries and allow yourself to help as much as you can, like shed love and light and whatever at whatever situation, but it's not up to you. And if something isn't for you, that is okay. You can't push controlling or whatever. You can't push people to change for you. and obviously that goes back to the way you grew up, the way that you may have learned your attachment styles or whatever. Like you can't push someone out of their own survival mode. You can lightly help them. It just depends on how receptive they are. And the hardest thing is learning how to let other people go, knowing that you could have helped them, knowing that you see more in them. I know from this past year, I was really opened up to the fact that like a missing piece of what I always thought was my purpose was the compassionate, like people loving piece. I always thought like, oh, I love creative stuff. I'm going to make like a lot of stories. I'm going to make music, but still kind of like, like being kind of arm's length with people. I'm going to make a podcast, still really great, but I never imagined myself doing anything more intimate and personal and one-on-one. But now I kind of see that like I do love that piece of it, and me learning how to transform like codependent patterns and being a therapist to boyfriends or being like in unhealthy dynamics where I give too much. I've learned that I can transition that to helping the people who are actually intentionally looking for help, helping the people who are who are open, and I need to draw the line and boundaries between like how much I can impose my thoughts and stuff on other people. Like I get obsessive. Like if I see that something bothers me, I'm going to sit and bitch about it because I want the system to change. And yeah, where it's valid, where you are a person of a society and a government and stuff, you should definitely be an activist and speak out against what is not right, because we should. However, again, if it's personal problems, we do have to find a way to, like put up our boundaries. But anyway, I have been learning that I really do care, and I'm always at my core learning, like I am like always thinking about how I could help fix a problem or help someone get to the core of their emotional issues. And I would let someone, like anyone who wants to open up to me, I would always be open to it. That is actually, and it's a little bit overbearing, but that's actually, I'm that type of person. And if you're empathic, you're like that too. That's probably what you want the most. Like, I'm that person at the party that's in the corner being like, oh my God, what was your childhood trauma over drinks? You know what I mean? Like, I want the world to be that vulnerable, but they're not always going to be. And I mean, granted, we're kind of transitioning into that, but that is the space that at least I want to make in my world. And it's very interesting that I was able to transition into this, and that's what a lot of us who are really empathic or started out like even isolated, who started out with the same sort of story as I did, like we came to that conclusion of like, okay, well, I'm going to now be the space that I needed as a kid. And again, if you have experienced these unhealthy patterns, if you learned a lot, and if you're just saying like, I have regret over it, or like, I learned from being stupid, or I learned from being like, someone with really low self-esteem and it was terrible, and I just want to warn people, and I want to like keep girls away from falling into really terrible patterns. Like, obviously, we don't want anything dangerous. We hate when other people are hurt. We don't want anyone to feel terrible or get into something that is taking away from their lives. However, I seriously just think that it's hard to just be perfect. It's hard to just be balanced already if you grew up a certain way. If you had to have had those hard relationships, that was for a purpose of balancing you out. And that is, I want to emphasize that. These hard relationships actually do provide, like, you're gonna balance if you really see it. And if it's to the point where, okay, this person's triggering my balance, my ability to work on myself, that is still what the energy that you needed to change. And so what's interesting is, and if you look closer, you'll see the universe does bring you the people you need, and you kind of attract it yourself. I'm not going to go into law of attraction and manifestation or whatever, but again, everything's a mirror to what you need to heal. And so if you are attracting a relationship or a person that's holding a mirror up to you, allow yourself at the very least to not put pressure on the relationship to be an ideal, but honor the fact that what's in front of you is going to teach you something, is likely going to teach you something that may help you balance out. What's funny is, after transitioning out of the previous relationship I had, I manifested a person who had a really different perspective. Like, he's somebody who really loves people. Also, and he has admitted this himself, may have, he has people-pleasing tendencies. He's a Libra, that makes sense. He cares a lot about people, but at the same time, he does care about what they think of him. And that's not a bad thing. But it's interesting that I have now started to date this person, and I'm learning that after my more jaded, like, I hate everyone phase, like, after I've been breaking that and, like, kind of putting that aside, I started to manifest someone who's going to help me open up. And it's funny because the last couple times that I tried to film this video, it was post, like, I fell back into a pattern where I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to work on this. I feel like initially when I started dating this guy, he had a lot of this similar tendencies to something that I'd seen before. And I will say I was proud of myself because I recognized a lot of it. And I initially was like, maybe that's not for me. I don't want to work on it. And that would have been valid. And that would have been just fine. But I also think the way that like I dealt with it, I had abruptly cut it off for a second, and I was like, I have to go, like I have to go, like work on myself, and that was still a pattern for me. Like I was not willing to work on something that potentially could be worked on, that potentially could balance me out, and so I went back to this guy and I said, obviously, let's give it another try, and so I realize now, like I don't know where this is going, but like I am now in a space where after a year of thinking I hate everyone, I don't know, everyone's in survival, I don't know, am I a victim, blah, like I get to open up and break open and allow other people to teach me. I don't have to be the controlling person, which honestly in some ways I have been. Like again, if you do take up the therapist role, if you do want to be the one that helps someone emotionally, there's some sort of control that you hold in that, and that is how you have a hold on people. Like especially in a romantic relationship, I notice with myself, if someone can go to you with their problems and you are the only person that's ever really been open and receptive to them, you hold some sort of control there. And honestly, on some subconscious level, I think that is what I wanted to do so I could keep them. But again, that is some way of controlling a person. And yeah, but so it's really funny because I am currently dating like somebody who actually I feel like can help me balance out in a healthier way. Like we are still kind of navigating the waters of it, but we've kind of noticed that we both have leftover codependent patterns, unhealthy habits and stuff. We're still learning how to communicate. And as much as we are both kind of like, oh, is this not going to work out? Like, there's parts of it where we're like, oh, you just kind of gave me perspective on this. Or, oh, actually, I do need to work on that in myself. And while I don't, I don't want it to be a fully like codependent but healing relationship, like, it's very interesting that now I'm at the point where I have one of these. Like I have something where I can communicate more, and it's a little bit rocky. And of course, doesn't mean that it's going to work out in the end, but it is exactly what I need right now. And what's interesting is like, I have started to break my pattern of just being the overgiver and the one that shows up more. And I found that I have a different role in this sort of relationship. Like I found that like this person is like kind of lightly pushing me into more social interactions than I let myself do before. And I won't say everything that I'm going to help him with, but I'm pretty sure that I'm going to give him more perspective and stuff about big picture things. So I think it's funny that like, because it's very much also what a lot of people are starting to experience now, which is very much, like millennials and anyone younger than that, learning to heal themselves and basically sounding like they're at a therapy session every time they're talking about whatever they need to work on together. But it's very funny because I love that our generation and everyone younger is being more open and speaking on their traumas and speaking on their patterns and like learning together. I do appreciate that, like, I could I like that we're all self-aware and becoming more self-aware of our mental health and our emotional needs, and it's a lovely thing. And yeah, again, I feel like it's very interesting and very vulnerable, to start letting yourself be helped as well. Especially again, if you're an empath, you do feel a sense of confidence in being the emotional support for somebody else. And if you find that you're getting that now and it feels unfamiliar and you're suddenly like, oh, actually, I'm now the vulnerable one. I'm not completely in control. Like, what is my value if I don't give you everything? Like, what is my role? Like, I think that's a healthy place for me to be. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. We'll see how I navigate it, but it is really interesting to have sort of come to this dynamic. And I can tell that everything else in my life too, like I can't really fall into the same closed-mindedness as I did before. As much as I kind of want to, like, I know at the moment that I cannot just say I hate people. And that is a huge change and a fucking, thank God, healthier change that I have had now. And it's funny because I have had a lot of mixed feelings about my family and our dynamics and like how much I forgive them, but also I'm frustrated. And in this person, like, I can tell there's still stuff to uncover on his end about this stuff, but you know, having someone's perspective, and he was somebody who also says like he loves his family time, or like he's more accepting of his family, and like seeing that I kind of realized like, okay, like this is a person that I really need around me to at least help me see a different perspective. So last advice on how to balance out and not be codependent but also still not be too isolated. You kind of just got to let yourself step out of your stagnant patterns. Allow yourself to at least try going on a date, try exposing yourself to different types of people. Like, and the moment that you feel resistance or you feel like you're trapped in a similar pattern, whether it be like with a relationship or even with like your workplace, your family, or new friends that you have, see if there's something like if you can respond differently, because basically you're not trapped. You always have the choice to leave. You always have the choice to learn and grow in a different way. I don't know if I said this already, but I think people can choose to fully just heal by themselves and like work with their therapist or life coach or shaman or whatever they're doing. They could choose to just find support groups, to just find friends and mentors. They can choose to find someone in their family that actually understands them. They can learn through romantic relationships. Like, I think for me, it has worked out to learn one-on-one with somebody, like, and even in a romantic setting, because I was so isolated, because I had done so much of the extreme opposite, that it's almost like in dating, I have learned so much about myself, because it was just a very focused one-on-one mirror, you know? I feel like if you don't quite know how to be yourself and how to be with yourself, take it day by day. And like, if you're like me and you do have an interesting dichotomy of like being really ambitious and seeing like a full vision, but also not feeling that connected to your feelings, and yet like it's very interesting because you know yourself, but you're not with yourself. But it's allow yourself to slowly chip at it, to let yourself do things little by little every day. What I'm saying is get used to it. Like, allow yourself to let it take time. I know I've gotten really impatient. I know that as I got older, like as I got into my late 20s and early 30s, I was beating myself up for not achieving something by a certain time, because I was always like priding myself on the fact that I work hard, the fact that like I ignore all my other needs in order to achieve. And you really gain more clarity when you listen to your needs. You gain more clarity when you listen to, like whenever I feel broken, whenever I feel really vulnerable, whenever I allow myself to finally hurt, that is when I get to gain more clarity. So I did another video based on meeting your own needs and your emotional needs. I think that not only do you need to meet your emotional needs in order for your body to balance out, in order for you to release and let go and be healthy, but when you listen to what your hurt is trying to tell you, when you listen to yourself and you become vulnerable with yourself, it will probably point you to what you actually need in your life and how that can build into your purpose, like how that can build into the life you actually want. Like, if you're like me and you're crying about how like, oh, someone hurt me, I don't want to be in a relationship with someone like that, and all you're doing is putting a guard up and being like, I have to prove to them that I am a strong person and that they are wrong. I have to prove to them that they have unhealthy patterns. Like, I have to be strong and show them that I'm very strong and I'm not insecure. But if I were to sit with myself and say, no, I feel insecure, like I feel hurt, like all I want to do is express that I feel hurt, you also open yourself up more to someone being responsive and being like, okay, I understand, you're hurt. You open yourself up more to realizing that a person isn't right for you, a situation isn't right for you. Like when you allow yourself to feel what you need to, you gain the clarity to point you in the right direction to what you need in your life. If you are unsure about your career or where you're going in life, and if you break down and you say, I I feel unhappy, or like I would love a job where I can express my feelings more, then maybe that will open you up to a hobby or a habit that you can build up where you can express your feelings more. Like all these things that we block, all the ways that we're not going towards what we want, all the ways that we tend towards, instead codependency and depending on other people. Like these things happen also because we aren't really listening to our emotions, to our hurts, to what we actually need, and what honestly emotions are what our soul needs. So the more you, I think, a lot of it is external habits. It's like putting in some minutes every day, like working on yourself, meditating, whatever. But like all of that's important and in 3D and grounds you, but also listening to yourself is kind of the most, like, is probably, in my opinion, honestly, is the more efficient starting point. Listen to what you actually feel and don't judge it yet. Like, and maybe even if you want to put a name on it, listen to your inner child. What are they missing out on? Like, what do they not want to do every day? Like, what are they aching to do? What sort of pain do they want to express, and to whom? Like the other day, I let myself sit and cry again, which is apparently something I love doing now. But like, I remember like thinking like, oh, I just want to cry and tell my parents, like, I wish that you were emotionally available for me. And I knew that mentally, but crying about it somehow brought me back around to soothing myself with it. And then I also got to this point where I was like, I want to be able to be emotionally available for other people. And and you know, and then I brought myself around again to like, and I'll be emotionally available and present for my parents in the way that I can. And maybe instead of waiting for them to do that, I get to influence the situation. So all of those steps couldn't happen unless I cried about it, what I actually wanted. And just sitting with how you feel without judgment, like, and giving yourself and your inner child that opportunity to heal and to feel listened to by yourself, by your adult self, is, and this is what I keep coming towards, like that is the solution, I think, in everything that I talk about, but it's the truth. Like, you are codependent because you were dependent on somebody else to give you what, you needed as a child, to give you that initial emotional availability. And I think for too long, the world has learned how to do that for themselves, and they haven't learned how to do that for other people. And we think, obviously, it's your responsibility to do it for yourself. But, we're not all islands. We do have to eventually build healthier relationships with better communication and like balance each other out too. Because we are still meant to help each other as much as we are meant to be our own selves. And I think that is what has always been confusing with people. Like, and that's why it's always been the question of like, do I have to be perfectly healed and perfectly self-aware before I date? Like, is me feeling like I need to be selfish right now make me an unhealthy friend or partner? Like, all of these questions can be solved with communicate and let yourself balance out. Yeah. Anyway, so it was a number 2 year for me, and it was a great sort of like, it was a really pivotal year with things that I just like, my biggest blocks had to be brought up so I could break them. So yeah, if you've gone through a difficult time and you had a year like mine, I bet you anything it is what you needed. Okay. Okay. Now I feel like, again, without being too attached to outcome, I have been finding that I have been healing my codependent patterns. I've been balancing out, working on myself and like being on my own and not feeling like I have to tug on someone else's energy for validation or to feel connection or quote unquote love. Like I am, I think, entering a new era, but also sidebar. So I know, did I say this before? I don't know, but like in numerology, like you also have like the year that you were born, you have like your birth numerology year, which is like a theme for your life or the year that you were born. And then every year you have a personal year, which is kind of the theme of what you're going to learn. 2024 for me was a number 2 year. And that means I had a huge focus on on my relationships, which meant I had to look at my codependency. It also is about balance. So I had to learn how to balance my internal and my external worlds. Like what I ended up doing, which is really funny, is like I ended up feeling like, oh my God, I have way too much energy coming at me. I feel really controlled. And then I really started owning my voice and putting stuff out into a podcast. So I was balancing out. I decided to balance out my energy instead of just sitting and like, I mean, granted, I definitely sat and ruminated and stuff, but my favorite word apparently is transmute because I use it a lot, but like I ended up transmuting whatever was happening and turning it into something. And I would definitely balance myself out. And so I love that I'm ending this year more balanced. And literally, like in my body, I'm usually really tense. I have had this uneven hip pattern for a while where like one of my hips is higher than the other. And there's like one is externally rotated and one is internally rotated. And I'm not gonna like, it's the funniest thing when what you're learning internally like you can see in your body physically, like and outside of yourself. Like the last month or two, my hips, I've seen like I finally unlocked like how I'm supposed to walk in order for them to not be uneven. Like my body has had this really uneven like rotation pattern like from my upper body and my lower body, and they're actually balancing out. It's the weirdest, funniest thing. And even in, I've been struggling with stomach issues, even that's been balancing out. So yeah, I'm ending this year allowing myself to be open to be balanced and to let go and shed my old belief system and like my habits about people. And I'm really thankful for the year that I had that broke me open, that balanced me out. And I am really thankful to be in a space where I can allow people in. Because I think with that, I can actually be a healthier empath or even take away from too much empathy and bring energy back to myself. Like I'm starting to learn how to really focus on what I want to by myself and not feel like I need anybody else like around to, work on my projects or whatever. So that is what is awaiting me. And so I hope, all this is, hopefully this helps anyone who might be struggling with similar things that I did. Anyway, hope you guys all gain perspective and have appreciated what you've learned, because I know you did learn something in 2024, even if it was difficult. Good on you, and have a great new year. Best wishes. Let's kill 2025 with whatever the theme is for that year. whatever we need to learn, let yourself learn it and keep up your boundaries. Okay, well, anyway, peace and love. Bye-bye.